So can you tell me what you're here doing at the protest at VCU?
Well, actually, I was just in the Starbucks, just having some coffee, and I came outside to all of it. I don't agree with it. I think that the ban is perfectly acceptable for right now.
What do you think the ban is acceptable?
Well, we have a vested interest in protecting the security of our citizens. That's what it does. It's not a ban on a religious people. It's no ban on Muslims. It's just a ban on immigration from certain areas, and I believe that's perfectly acceptable.
Right. If we want to talk about the facts, nowhere in the executive order did it mention Muslim countries.
Right.
Right.
Correct.
And a lot of the people here are unaware that the person who actually put this stuff into place was Obama in 2015, right?
Correct.
And the Travel Terrorist Prevention Act.
Yep.
Right. So he selected those countries himself.
Yep.
Iraq, Iran, Libya, Somalia, Syria, Yemen, Sudan, right? All those is that Obama selected himself. It's not like Trump picking from a name from a hat, right?
Right.
So seven countries that are Muslim, but there
Yep.
are 56 Muslims all over the world. So it's not like he put a ban on all of them to say that he's Islamophobic, right? So your position then is that it's okay then to put a ban on people coming in, right?
For immigration purposes,
For
not
immigration.
necessarily on a religious point of view or on a certain. It'd be unconstitutional to have a ban on Arabs as a race, or Muslims or Jews as a certain religion,
group.
ethnic group. But as far as just immigration from the territories where there has been terrorism from refugees in the United States from the refugee program, I believe it's perfectly acceptable.
Okay. Now, what do you think though? When you look at the United States, right, and the boundaries and the borders that it creates, though.
Yes.
Now, these are, you can say, public borders, though, right? These are the borders belong to that fictional entity called the government. Right?
Correct.
So they're they're not your private borders, like your home. You have your fence that demarcate your property, right? You're allowed to say whatever you want in regards to who's allowed to come in on your property for your house, or if you have unwanted guests, to say, I
lock the door at night.
Right, you lock the door, you leave, right?
Exactly.
I think those kind of property lines and whatever you want to say of permitting entry or not is perfectly acceptable. But when you look at government, though, these are not private borders, right? These are technically borders that government doesn't allow people to homestead in those areas, right? Public land is not really, it's not privatized because government prevents people from homesteading those lands.
Gotcha.
Right? So then I can't really then say that the government should prevent people from crossing these borders because technically it's not privatized borders. They're not private borders, right?
But one of the largest reasons for the government, and one of the reasons that I believe that the government should still be around, is because it has a vested interest in protecting its citizens. When doing so, you have to protect the borders. You have to protect the boundaries that is your country. Within the country, there are certain laws and regulations that you must abide by when you're a citizen. We're a representative republic underneath the Constitution of the United States. In order for the government to play a role in giving us those freedoms, we have to protect those freedoms at all costs.
Now, a citizen would be defined, would you say this is an accepted definition of a citizen? You give up certain rights, freedoms to the body politic that is the state or government, and in return you're provided protection.
Well, I don't believe with that definition.
How would you define a citizen?
The Constitution of the United States is not rights that are endowed by the government; they're rights that are endowed by God. A definition of a right is a right that predates government, before government.
Right.
They believe that it's for God.
So negative rights, not positive rights.
No, they're still positive rights. How would they be negative rights?
So positive rights would be, I have a right to something, but that infringes on the labor of someone else to provide it for you, right? A right to health care infringes on doctors to have to provide it for you, right?
No, I agree. I agree that health care isn't a right. You obviously don't have a right to somebody else's labor. But rights that are, freedom of speech, freedom to protect yourself, things like that, those actually don't have any sort of, you're not forcing anything on somebody else.
Right.
Those are all individual rights.
And then from here, you're saying that government protects these rights, right?
Correct.
Now, what if I were to tell you then that they don't, and that many Supreme Court cases, like in Winnebago versus East Cheney County, Warren versus District of Columbia, many Supreme Court judges have decreed that they have no obligation to protect your life, liberty, or property?
I would have to look at those cases.
Yeah,
I've never heard of them before, but I'm not sure how they wouldn't have a right to protect. I know that the ones that say that the police doesn't necessarily have, they're not, bound by law to have to protect you in certain situations.
So you're forced to pay for a monopolized government service of security in which they don't have to provide. Can you imagine if that was the kind of service you got from like Netflix? Oh, we'll stream you that movie when we feel like it.
Well, I don't think that the government has to provide everything for the. Obviously, I believe that if you're left alone to your own individual liberties and freedoms, that you're going to prosper yourself.
Right.
As far as a macroeconomic point of view, the government still does have a role among its citizens to provide protection by threat of outside sources.
Right. So Supreme Court rulings aside, that they've said from their own word of mouth that there's no protection. Now, how can government then make the claim that we're here to protect your property when they must first rob you of that property through taxation? Right. There's a contradiction there, because you can't make the claim that you're going to do good when you first have to do acts of evil, and then saying that the money we're going to take that from you is going to help you out. Right?
Well, yeah, I mean, taxes are a gangster shakedown, pretty much.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree, but I still believe that some gangster shakedowns are useful. I believe that, obviously, I don't want to pay a tax for, healthcare, for the right of a healthcare to somebody else, because, you don't have a right to somebody else's labor.
All right.
But I still believe that there's a proper role in taxing people to allow for the protection of all people.
But so what do you think then? So you come from a conservative view, right?
Yeah.
Republican?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right, so then you see then that the reason you don't want government to be involved in the healthcare is because
you don't have a right to somebody else's labor.
Right. Now, if that is a fundamental principle then, right, then that must also include any other kind of right to security then. You don't have the right to someone else's labor to pay for someone else's security. Or you don't have a right to someone else's labor to pay for anything then, right? You must be consistent with these principles, or they're just preferences. They're not morals or virtues or values that you actually hold to be consistent, right? I would say then, if you look at government and why they shouldn't be involved in X, Y, and Z, you must go all the way down to all platforms to government services that are monopolized and say, look, the market can provide these services at a much better rate, and that you'll find will allow market competition that always lowers prices, improves its quality, right? And any good and services. And not government is not a magical word that people utter and then finally,
no,
you have it, right?
Yeah, I can understand that. No, I agree that government's definitely not a fix-all for everything. I think that there would be a lot of trouble trying to privatize the security of an entire nation like that. Whereas I can understand the privatization of a lot of different markets, I still believe that the government has a vested interest in protecting its citizens. I still believe that plays a larger role in the global markets, the entire role of the United States and on a global scale. Whether people want to admit it or not, our military is the greatest peacekeeping organization in the United States or in the world.
How many countries did Obama bomb?
Oh, he's bombed a lot. Trust me, I'm not.
7, right?
That's why I find this whole thing hypocritical.
I don't think the military has done anything to defend our freedoms. I was in the military myself too, and I can tell you that the mission has failed. Right, the illusion that we're going out there to defend our freedoms when it's here at home, where we're losing it. Overseas, drone bombing those countries, so 8 countries, and thousands of civilians murdered. Of course, they call it collateral damage.
Right.
Yeah, you call it by a different name. We don't want to call it theft. We'll call it taxes. We don't want to call it organized like mass murder. We'll call it organized war. Right. So I think the best way to kind of proceed forward is calling things by its true name. And you see taxation as a gangster shakedown, then it all has to be gangster shakedowns, right? It all has to be theft. I don't think any good could ever arise from stealing from anyone and saying that I know how better to spend your money, right?
Yeah, but I think that the way to kind of look at it too is that even though the government doesn't necessarily supply us with our freedoms, they do allow us to live in a country that allows those freedoms, that protects them in some certain way by saying that because you're in this country, you're allowed to have these freedoms. Because you're born here, you're allowed to have these freedoms.
Like what?
Well, like freedom of speech.
That's everywhere. South America has that. Europe has that. That's
well, there's a lot of I know that there's a lot of freedom of speech in other countries, but the freedom in other countries isn't anywhere close to the freedoms that are in this country. And we still are the only country that was created to show that our freedoms are not endowed by government; they're endowed by God. which allows us to have those freedoms. When those freedoms are given to us, we're allowed to prosper in a nation that is safe and allows for individual liberty. And at least before, it used to have individual morality. So when you allow the citizens to have these freedoms and to prosper and grow, they create everything around you. So all of this was created because we're able to have our freedoms, because we're able to pursue our goals, pursue our dreams.
I would say that's the result of what's left of capitalism.
Yeah,
right?
well,
the
that's
return of capital and saving capital and investing, and
well, that's I believe that
that had nothing to do with government.
Well, yeah, but I'm saying that when the government allows that protection of us, we're allowed to prosper and grow.
But they can't protect you if they have to rob you first. They can't claim that it's protecting you.
Well, they can still protect you even if they rob you. A gangster shakedown, you can take your money from somebody, but that gangster can still come by and protect you if somebody else is threatening you.
Well, so you recognize the government as a criminal gang then. Now, would you not then advocate market competition providing security in all facets and levels, right?
Well, I believe that you can have market competition to provide security. I don't believe that it's going to be able to be performed on a global scale.
Well, and we're talking about like in this geographic region and the way that global scale could be, right?
Yeah.
I don't advocate for abolition of government just here, but all over the world.
Right.
Markets to be liberated.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the thing is, have you ever heard of the Pinkertons?
No.
The Pinkertons was an organization. It's the organization that the FBI came from.
Right.
This is a private organization, capitalist organization, before they started getting in bed with the government. But they had more armed people doing investigative work, catching bad guys and train robbers. More people employed than the United States military combined at that time in the 1800s. So you had one private organization that had more people employed, armed people, catching bad guys, protecting property rights than the United States military. They never conquered like cities or counties and anything like that because their services was like subscription-based fee, right?
Yeah.
There you pay for the services. It's not based by taxes, right?
Yeah.
So there are examples of like the market can produce this. You go to Disney World, you go to a mall, you go to a nightclub. Gated communities have security.
Yep.
Right. Now, then it shouldn't be difficult then to see then if the market can't produce this, then the market could also produce this in a mass scale if the government was out of the way, right? If the government wasn't taking like nearly 40% of their income through taxes, that's a lot to invest and grow. And
that is a lot to invest and grow. I would say that the 1800s is a little bit different time than what it is now. Obviously, we have a lot more different threats now than what we did back then, and there's a lot more of a global population than there is now. Whereas I do understand that private organizations can provide security at a certain rate. I still believe that there's a lot more facets to it than what people would perceive, and that the government still does have a certain role in providing those organizations. You have the entire intelligence community of the government that's here and abroad.
What, the one that said that Trump pissed on his on that desk? Right, yeah, great intelligence work there, right?
Yeah, not everybody in the intelligence agency is going to be very smart about everything.
Or the one that Edward Snowden got away from. So look, they're doing a lot of evil things here, right?
Yep.
Right, so I can't really say that they're like independent in terms like they're going to help us out, but they all work for the government, right? It's like when you go to court, the police works for the government, the judge works for the government, the prosecutor works for the government, the defender lawyer that they give you if you can't provide one for yourself works for the government.
Right.
It's not impartial in that manner,
Yeah.
right? So I can't really say that they really generally have my interests. And I guess in their mind.
I think that a lot of times you are going to find that people have their own individual interests. You've seen it countless times. I still believe that there are good-hearted people that are going to have the interests of the United States people, especially those fighting overseas who do it, on a daily basis to protect our freedoms.
They don't. I was in the military. I'm saying they weren't. They don't.
Well,
they don't.
The military, I believe, still does fight to protect the freedoms.
Then they will be here, or they'll be fighting for the freedoms, not overseas. I think they've been tricked, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're saying that the enemy is out there, but they're not. It's here. Every law is a regulation restricting what you can do with your property, right?
Right. I believe sometimes that's true that they are tricked into thinking that a threat isn't a threat. I still believe, though, is that the best policy is to find the threat before it happens and take care of it, rather than let the threat take care of you first before you go after it.
The threat here, I would say, are like the millions of people locked up in cages for victimless crimes. That's a big threat. Millions of people. We're locking up prisoners here more than the gulags of communist Russia.
Are you talking about more of like drug crimes?
Yeah, drug crimes. And
nonviolent crimes and
right,
things like that. Well, I agree with that on a point. I'm more of a libertarian when it comes to decriminalization of drugs.
It helped
and
Portugal
things like that.
10 years ago.
Yeah, The only thing that I can say to that point, as far as decriminalization of drugs, I think that we should probably get rid of a welfare state in the first place before we start decriminalizing drugs.
A lot of stuff, yeah.
Yeah, to just kind of allow it to be a more of an individual liberty thing, and rather than having taxpayer dollars go to towards a program that could potentially fund people who are on drugs.
So I was going to give you a card.
Oh,
I
I
already
think
gave
you
you
gave
one.
me one.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So the organization we're with is Liberty RVA. It's a non-political. It's a free market. You're part of the free market, right? I can see that, right?
Free market capitalism.
But we want to go all the way with free market capitalism, right?
Gotcha.
When we say we respect property rights, we advocate for it, we mean it.
Okay.
We don't have like buts, right? It's like,
right.
but government,
Yeah.
right. And I think that's like the sole focus of what capitalism should be today, right? In terms of respect for property rights and what you create and your labor, and it's yours, right? And no one has any right to infringe upon that or take any piece, whether it's 5% or 10% or nearly half of that, right?
Yeah.
And so, we're Richmond's capitalist group here.
Okay, cool.
Definitely
Awesome.
check us out.
I think we have a lot more in common than all these people do. Right. So.
And that's the thing about it. Hopefully, we'll see like a lot of the anger that they have here. It goes on consistently even after Trump, right?
Oh yeah.
Because like where were they during Obama's reign, right?
Or when he banned Iraq refugees in 2011, or when he dropped 30,000 bombs in 2016 on 7 different Muslim countries.
Right.
So I don't think that they actually care about it. I think that they're just out here protesting against somebody they don't like.
Right. So we'll see. I think over time, maybe helping with the consistency and reminding them this sort of stuff.
Yep.
And then we could be just as strong after Trump, and regardless who's sitting on that throne.
Oh
right?
yeah, always keep the president's feet to the fire, regardless of who it is. Right. If you don't like them, if you like them, keep them to the feet to the fire. If you don't like them, keep it their feet to the fire.
Or work Game of Thrones style and try to abolish that seat of power. It's good talking to you, man.
Yeah, it's good talking to you too.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, have a good rest of the day, guys.
You too.